Imagine finally breaking free from old patterns and wounds with your spouse or partner and growing closer than ever by building trust, compassion, and true understanding. In part two of today's episode, you'll hear powerful stories and learn real tools for transforming family life and modeling conscious self care for your children. Stay tuned.
Both of us are here suffering, and it transforms from how can we make it right for both of us? From that place, they were able to get playful and say, okay, Mike agreed that if he leaves his socks or underwear on the floor and Nancy has to pick it up, he's gonna either clean the dishes after dinner or give her a 10-minute foot massage at the end of the day. And then just they turned it into a game between them. But you couldn't get there when their nervous system is dysregulated. So how do you get them to connect first with themselves, with their own heart through self-compassion? And then this paradoxical thing of taking the person that feels like an adversary and realizing that they're suffering along with us. And then through that mutual compassion, they come into being in connection and then on the same team. So this is like you might say is a paradoxical intervention of taking in the person that I'm in conflict with, their own suffering into my heart, and exhaling out compassion, kindness, and love. And then that opens us up and we feel better and they feel better and we're more connected. So this would be like a spiritual intelligence capacity, drawing in our heart's capacity for compassion for ourselves and others.
A lot of levels there that I love. I love that self compassion plus that compassion for your partner too. And through that shared humanity. So the other person is not the adversary here. You're on the same team. Through all of that comes regulation, connection, that spiritual intelligence you're talking about. Just for clarification, what was it that you breathe in?
Breathing in, I take in your suffering.
Suffering, that's what it was. And then you
Or
breathe
pain,
out.
or in Buddhism, where this practice was developed, they talk about suffering. So breathing in, I take in your pain, your suffering, my pain, my suffering. And then breathing out, I exhale compassion, kindness, and love.
Mhm. I was just working with some couples this morning and we were doing some rendition of this, but using different words, vocabulary. And it is amazing what happens when they start to see each other not as the enemy, but able to move past that into greater connection and letting go of those things as they see the suffering of the other person and they stop seeing each other as the bad guy in a sense. It can be hard to get there, but I love how you kind of break it down, how you can help them get to that space in maybe a session or as you're working with them. So what about people that are listening? How do we really do this at home? What is it that we can really do, whether it's our own spiritual work or together actually doing this in a way that works if we don't have a therapist?
First, if you're having difficulty in the relationship or whatever it is, do the basic self-compassion practice. So our compassion has to start with ourselves, and we have to recognize our own difficulty, and that regulates us and increases our capacity then to hold in the suffering of others. If I'm overwhelmed and my nervous system is dysregulated, I'm not going to be able to take in my partner, acknowledge their humanity and likely suffering too. The first thing is to do the self-compassion practice, whatever it is. I could say, hey, I put my right hand flat in the center of the chest, my left hand on top of that. Feel my breath, the contact of my hand with my chest. Yosi, this difficulty, this situation is painful. Unfortunately, this is a normal part of life. Many other human beings face the same. Let's say I was laid off from my job and I'm really feeling down and distraught. But any day, there are hundreds of thousands of people being laid off from their jobs. So being laid off, painful, is disappointing. And unfortunately, this is part of life. Many other people are being laid off. And I'm here with you. We'll go through this together. I'm committing to myself that I'm staying with myself through my pain. Most of us resort to distraction. We go drinking or use substances. We do anything to distract ourselves from the pain, from the difficulty. Now, paradoxically, when we turn into our pain, into our difficulty and acknowledge it Our heart is naturally compassionate. When we acknowledge our suffering, our heart starts to expand and get soft and tender towards ourselves instead of rejecting ourselves. So all of us have been abandoned. Our parents, our caregivers weren't attuned always, they weren't available. We felt abandoned. And then we do this to ourselves. We abandon ourselves. So just like if a dear friend comes and tells us they're facing some difficulty, none of us would think to dismiss it and say, oh, it's not a big deal. Let's just have a drink. That would be very dismissive and not kind. But yet we do that to ourselves. You can practice this self-compassion with whatever difficulty you have. I have a partner that frustrates me, and then I need to acknowledge the frustration, the difficulty that I'm having. And when we do that, we become inner directed in our locus of control with ourselves as opposed to trying to change our partner, which is the problem is them. And yeah, we have to assert our needs, and that's good for them and us. But first, we got to get regulated, recognize our own pain, and calm ourselves down so we could skillfully bring up our concern or negotiate.
That's important. I think we sometimes overcomplicate it. We're looking for all these major tools, all this information, and we have to do A, B, and C, but ultimately it does come down to that validation, that compassion, that empathy, that presence first for ourselves and then for the other person. It feels like this paradox, but by feeling that suffering, then through that we're able to move forward, going to escapism like so many of us do with technology, with even other
Yeah.
things like exercise, whatever it might be, positive or negative. I really appreciate you breaking that down, what that could look like and why that's important and how that connects to spiritual intelligence.
Yeah, if you want, I could share another story about how self compassion in the midst of a couple conflict helps open us, leads to forgiveness. A couple that has been married for 5 years, they have a 3-year-old son. They went through a turbulent time in separation. The wife had an extramarital affair. They thought of breaking up, they got back together and patched things up. She expressed her regret. He said he forgives her, and now they're considering having a second child. And all of a sudden, he flooded again with this sense of betrayal by what happened that presumably he intended to forgive her. The natural thing would be for her to say, hey, I thought I've apologized and I thought you forgave me, and why are we rehashing this? But forgiveness is a process. His sense of betrayal was coming up as they were considering having another child. So rather than bypass, I was like, let yourself feel this betrayal, bring in some compassion to that. What does this remind you of? We've been betrayed, and oftentimes when we're betrayed by our partner, whether it's an affair or they don't do what we expect them, there's a sense of betrayal. His first sense of betrayal was being a child and hearing his father saying to his mother, oh, we don't have to honor our promise to him. We promised him to get him a bike for his birthday, but he's just a child. We don't have to honor the promise. And so as a child, he felt betrayed, like, what do you mean, dismissed? So as he remembered this child and then bring in compassion, his adult self doing a self-parenting to his young child and sending him compassion, the compassion felt like warmth and light in his heart. As he felt that openness, tenderness in his soft heart, I invited him to trace the light to its source. As he traced the light, it was like a point of light in the back of his heart. And then all of a sudden he realized that he's also surrounded by light. So he moved into this, what you might call a transpersonal experience, where there was a light emanating in his heart, but he's also surrounded by this field of light. And then I say, okay, if you are staying with this light, also feel your feet, connection to the earth, to ground it. And from that place, he started to feel stronger, more resourced. And spontaneously from this, I said, well, how do you feel about this child? How do you feel about your partner? And he's like, oh, I understand. She was just lonely. I was traveling a lot on business. She wasn't trying to hurt me. There was natural forgiveness that came from when he was resourced felt this light that was permeating and radiating from his chest and surrounding him. And then he even from that place was like, oh, and my dad, he was just laid off and he was feeling poor at the time and whatever. So that helped him do some healing with his dad and forgiveness. But all of that started because he was doing self compassion and tuning into his inner child that was betrayed by his father. That original wound was playing out in this sense of betrayal through his wife. So, this is an example where the relationship is a practice ground for healing. He healed himself in his wounded inner child and his relationship with his father that was also getting projected and played out with his sense of betrayal with his partner. And that led to deeper level of forgiveness.
Yeah.
And she's witnessing all of that about him. Then she gets more tender, understanding, and compassionate toward him.
Yeah.
So it brings in a greater level of intimacy between both of them.
It's not just white knuckling it and saying, oh, I forgive you, or just maybe avoid these feelings of betrayal or resentment, but instead going to that space where you bring in that suffering and have compassion for yourself first. As you're able to have compassion for yourself, your child self, do some of that work. It naturally goes to this compassion for others, for your dad, for your partner, whoever that might be. And in that, again, your spiritual intelligence grow and you draw closer as a couple, that greater connection.
Yeah. And so you're connected more to yourself, to your source of light within your heart and your partner and the greater world,
Yeah.
whatever language you want to use there.
And it sounds like in order to do this, you really have to slow down and make space for it, not just go to those things you like to escape to avoid that suffering, those feelings that it stirs up in you. And
Yeah.
that's
So
not always easy.
that's why it's a lifelong journey. This is how we develop the capacity for openness and to be with what is. And that makes us more resilient and builds our confidence. I can handle and stay with my sadness. I can handle and stay with my anger, not bypass it, but not necessarily act it out. So I can acknowledge my anger, but I'm not going to call names and say nasty things that later I will regret or throw a temper tantrum. But I could be conscious of my anger. I could
Yeah.
be conscious of my sadness without going into clinical depression. We're using everything as a portal to increase our capacity to be with ourselves, with the truth of the moment. And
It sounds like almost like having more of a curiosity for it, having curiosity for that anger and acknowledging it, not hiding it, not minimizing it, but again, going back to that validation, that empathy, that compassion, that presence. I
uh
love that. And I feel like there's so many levels of this. What about other people that are like, oh man, I just want to understand this better. I feel like there's so much more to learn here. Do you have places they could go learn more about that?
I'm in the midst of starting to write another book on spiritually intelligent relationships. I'm doing a study right now with couples. The couple have the option of getting a report about where their strengths and so on, what each of those capacities, each of those dimensions of spiritual intelligence are, like purpose and service. We focus today here on compassion, which I think is super important. But it's in the works. And if people want to learn more, depending on when this podcast get put out there, they can join our study and participate as a couple.
So where
So,
do they find you if they are interested in that?
well, they go to my website, amram.net. Or if it's hard to remember the spelling of my name, I have a nonprofit where there's a link for the study, awakeningsi.org. They can go to that website and they'll ask to join the study. It's free. And I give people a report about strengths and areas for opportunities and practice tips for how they can bring that into their relationships.
I'll put that in the show notes so they can find it as well. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with, like a quote, a mantra, anything like that? Or maybe something we didn't speak to that you're like, no, I need to share this one piece.
Sure. Well, a quote that I like is from Rilke, which is, for one human being to love another, that is perhaps the most difficult task of all, the work for which all other work is but preparation. It is a high inducement for the individual to ripen, a great exacting claim upon us, something that chooses us out and calls us to vast things. We struggle with our relationships, etc., and I think this speaks to why loving another human being when we're cohabitating with them, when we do all our projections on each other, father projection, mother projection, working through all of that, and expanding our heart's capacity for loving ourselves, loving each other, and also loving the one. I think that's a wonderful journey, and it's not for the faint of hearted. That would be my quote. If there's anything else I would want to share, is that everything in our universe is pretty much finite and there's limited resources. So if I have $100 and I share it with you, I have less. If I have a bottle of milk and I share it with you, then I have less. But if I have a certain amount of love in my heart and I share it with you, I don't end up with less. I end up with more. My capacity for love and joy expands. I think I like to remind myself that sharing our love, sharing my joy actually feels good and more joyful. So that's my mantra, if you will.
You're right. We often have this scarcity mindset, but love is not one of those things that we run out of. It just increases. I love your quote and all of these insights that you have on how we can increase our spiritual intelligence. And you're right. We don't just arrive there and then we're done. Like you mentioned, it's like health. That's something that we continue to work towards and to continue to build. And it does involve a lot of that slowing down to validate, to have that empathy, that presence, that compassion, so that we can have that for others as well. Regulation is a big part of that, so that we can have greater curiosity and kindness for one another. I think that's beautiful. So thank you for sharing all these wonderful things with us today. We loved having you on the show.
Thank you, Kendra. It's been delightful, and thanks for the opportunity.
It's been such a joy to share ways you can spark that deeper healing and excitement in your relationships and everyday life. For more inspiration and hands-on help, check out our fulfillment therapy internship opportunities. Dive into our latest podcast, blog posts, and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Fulfillment Therapy. Join our email list for updates and exclusive resources tailored to your journey as a thriving parent. Also, some of you said you don't know about this. I haven't mentioned it as much, but check out our YouTube channel as well. That is in the show notes if you want to go find it. All of our episodes are there, so you can now enjoy video and audio. All right, my friends, I'll see you back here next Monday with new episodes. Until then.